What's up everybody, my name is Ben. I am a content manager and videographer here at Westpath, and today I wanted to talk about this thing. If you're a surfer or you have surfed, chances are you've seen one of the GoPros out in the water. And today I wanted to go over how to get the best out of your GoPro. So before we get started, I want to dispel a common myth. There's no such thing as best settings for your GoPro. There's only best settings for your experience level as a videographer and how much editing you want to do in post-production. With that being said, I'm going to give you my personal recommendation or the settings that I use, just in case you just wanted to fast forward through this video and just see what settings I use. That will pop up on the screen right now. Now, when you open up the GoPro, you'll notice that there are already some settings that are set up already. Let's make our own preset. So click this little button right here and it'll open up this menu. So from here, there will be a few different features on this first screen. There's going to be resolution, frame rate, and lens. Now, these are all really important, but let's break it down. So resolution is pretty simple. You've heard things like 1080, HD, 2.7K, 4K, 5.3K. 5.3K is the highest quality you can film on the GoPro. Your phone only really shows video at around 1080p, or most phones do at least. So it's not the most important thing that you shoot in 5K or 4K since you're mainly consuming your media through your phone. But the cool thing about having more resolution is that you have more space to work with and more pixels to work with, thus making it a higher quality video, even if you're downscaling down to 1080p. So I usually recommend filming at least 4K or 5.3K because that'll give you that really crisp footage. But if you don't have a ton of storage on your laptop or your phone or your SD cards, it is really okay to shoot at 2.7 or 1080p. I promise you, it's not that big of a deal, especially since we're consuming content mostly on our phone. Now let's talk about frame rate. Now video at its core is just a bunch of pictures taken back to back to back to produce a moving image. Most video is shown at 24 frames per second. So how come GoPros have the option to shoot at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second? Well, with the extra frames that you have from shooting, you're able to slow your footage down and make it look still really smooth. So for example, if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you'll be able to slow your footage down to 40%. And if you're shooting at 120 frames a second, you're able to slow your footage down to 20% to get that really, really nice slow motion. So this is up to you once again. The GoPro caps 5K at only 60 frames per second, but you can shoot 4K on the GoPro at 120 frames per second. So you'll lose that K of resolution if you choose 4K, but you'll be able to slow your footage down that much more. Personally, I recommend shooting at 5.3K at 60 frames per second. I really don't mind only slowing down your footage down to 40%. But if you really, really want to have that great slow motion, and if you're doing a lot of actions, if you're doing a lot of turns, if you're doing aerials, if you're getting caught in the barrel, I really think that 120 frames a second is really great also. It's just up to your personal preference. The next menu, we'll talk about the protein settings. So these are really your settings that you can adjust manually to make sure your exposure is exactly what you want. So let's talk about ISO. ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. The lower the ISO, the less sensitivity, the darker the image usually, and the higher the ISO means that you're able to basically brighten up your image because it's more sensitive to light. But there is a drawback. The higher the ISO, the more grainy your footage will look and your footage will lose quality. So personally, I like to cap my ISO at 1600. Usually it's on a scale between ISO 100 and ISO 25,000. Going above 1600, you're gonna be put at risk for making your footage look pretty bad. But if you're shooting or if you're surfing a lot at sunrise or sunset, you're gonna wanna have this number be a little bit higher so you can record in lower light situations. But personally, my preference is to keep it between ISO 100 and ISO 1600, so my max limit will be 1600. Now let's talk about shutter speed. Now, like I said earlier, videos are just a rapid succession of photos taken back to back to produce motion. So what shutter speed is the amount of time your lens is open before the photo is taken. The longer your lens is open, the higher the shutter speed, the more light is let in, and the brighter your photo. So usually this is measured in a fraction of a second. So numbers like 1/60, 1/125, 1/240, that denotes how long your lens is open, and that denotes your shutter speed. So the rule of thumb here is you want your denominator of your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. So for example, if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be 1/125. If your frame rate is 120, then you want your shutter speed to be 1/240. The reason for this is something called motion blur. Now I'm going to show you two videos side by side. and one is following that double rule and the other one isn't, and you can kind of see where the motion blur comes in. Motion blur is really, really important to make your footage look very cinematic. And that is why I cap my shutter speed at 120 or 1 over 125 when I'm shooting at 60 frames a second. Bitrate, I would always keep this high pretty much. This is the amount of data being recorded to your card. The higher, obviously, the better quality. The only reason I would turn this low is if I have no storage, but most of the time, I'd say 99% of the time, this is gonna be on high. All right, let's talk about sharpening. I usually think in-camera sharpening looks pretty bad, but if you want your footage to look a little bit better, it's just straight out of your GoPro. And if you're just exporting it onto Instagram straight from your GoPro, then I'd probably recommend keeping this on medium or high. I don't even know the other settings, but I'd say I always keep this on low because I'm gonna do some post-production correction. But like I said, it's up to you. And then on to color. I'd say this is the most important thing about having high quality footage. If you want your footage to look great straight out of the GoPro, you're gonna wanna keep this neutral or vibrant. That's because, you know, it adds a color in and it looks great and there's some saturation to it. If you shoot it flat, which is what I recommend, your footage straight out of the camera will look a little bit gray. If you do any kind of post-production color correction or post-production color grading, you need this setting to be on flat. I always keep this on flat because I like color correcting and grading my footage, and that's how you get the best results. But if you don't do any of that, keep this at neutral or vibrant. This is super important. And that should be it for the most important settings in the GoPro menu. I personally like to keep a few different presets based on different frame rates. And now that you know what each setting kind of does, you can kind of adjust it based on your preference. If you're looking for any great surf products like surf ponchos, surf turf, or wetsuit cleaner, along with yoga goods, home goods, and Mexican blankets, head over to our website, westpath.com. Link is in our bio. Follow Westpath on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope to see you out in the water and stay stoked.